If you sink this ball, I'll give you $10K. Richard Whitmore's mocking laugh carried across the manicured grounds of Palmcrest Golf Club. Annie looked toward the flag at the 18th hole, then back at him. "What are you staring at?" Richard said, raising his voice when she didn't answer. $10,000 is probably more than you make in a year picking up balls for rich men. I'm giving you a chance here. A little encouragement. A way to show off whatever talent you've got for collecting things off the grass. He tilted his head, smiling as the men behind him began to laugh. Or is that too much money for you to even think straight? Annie stood with the basket lowered at her side. "Sir," Annie said calmly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was only helping." "Oh, were you?" Richard cut in, pointing the head of his club toward her. "A minute ago, you were pretty eager to touch my ball. So let's see what you can do with it." "I already told you, sir. I thought it was one of the range balls. I was helping Mr. Samuel." "Come on, girl," Richard said, waving one hand as if brushing away an insect. "Don't pretend. I can see what you are. The clothes, the basket, the way you're wandering around where you don't belong. Some people are meant for the clubhouse, and some people are meant for the tool shed." One of his partners, a heavy man with a red face and a drink in his hand, let out a loud laugh. "That's generous of you, Whitmore," the man said, giving a ball girl a chance to perform on a gentleman's course. The obese man standing beside Richard looked toward the flag whipping hard in the wind, then let out a mocking laugh. "Richard, look at that wind," he said, swirling the champagne in his glass. "It's cutting straight across the fairway. Even a decent golfer would think twice before taking that shot." Richard curled his lips, his eyes still fixed on Annie. The obese man continued, his voice dripping with ridicule. "And this is the 18th hole, for God's sake. A par 5. Long fairway, nasty crosswind, sand traps waiting near the approach, and a green sloped just enough to punish anyone stupid enough to be arrogant." He glanced Annie up and down, then laughed. "Experienced golfers respect this hole, Richard. Men who have played for 20 years still lose money here. And that little ball girl thinks she can walk up, hold a club, and sink it like she was born on a country club lawn?" Richard gave a cold smile. "That's exactly why I chose it. Let her show us what she can do." Annie looked straight at him. Her face did not change. Her eyes stayed clear, steady, almost gentle. "I don't need your money, sir," she said, "and I'm not a ball attendant here." Richard laughed harder, stepping closer now. "Oh, now we've got pride," he said. "If you're not picking up balls, then what are you? Don't dress like help and get offended when people treat you like help." Mr. Harris, the club manager, was already hurrying across the cart path, his face pale beneath his visor. He knew Annie. He knew exactly who her father was. "Mr. Whitmore," Harris called, trying to keep his voice professional. "There has been a serious misunderstanding, Miss." Annie raised one hand without taking her eyes off Richard. Harris stopped. For a moment, his expression begged her to let him speak. "Let me fix this. Let me tell him who you are." But Annie gave the smallest shake of her head. Richard noticed the exchange and mistook it for fear. "Oh, now the manager's nervous," he said, turning back to his partners. "See? This is what happens. You try to give someone a little opportunity, and everyone gets sensitive." "I don't need an opportunity from you," Annie said. The words were not loud, but they cut through the laughter before it could start again. Richard's smile tightened. "Is that right?" "Yes, sir." He lifted a ball from the grass and held it between two fingers. "Fine," he said. "You want to stand here like you know the game? Let's make it interesting." "Mr. Whitmore," Harris said, stepping forward, "I really must object." Richard did not even look at him. "Relax, Harris. I'm encouraging young talent." Annie studied him. "That's what you call this?" "That's exactly what I call it." He pointed his club down the fairway. 18. "From here, sink it, and I'll give you $10,000. He paused, enjoying the widening eyes of the men behind him. "Miss it, and you walk away. No attitude, no excuses, and you don't come back wandering around places where you don't belong." The silver-haired partner laughed again, though softer this time. "From here, that's not a shot. That's a miracle." Richard chuckled. "Then I suppose she has nothing to worry about." Harris came close enough to speak under his breath. "Miss Annie, you do not have to do this. I know. Your father will be here any minute. This isn't about my father." Harris swallowed. Richard tossed his driver down at her feet. Not handed, tossed. The polished shaft hit the grass and rolled once against her shoe. "Try not to scratch it," he said, A few of the men laughed because they did not know what else to do with the shame beginning to creep into the moment. Annie looked down at the club. She set the basket of balls gently on the grass. Then she bent, picked up the club, and weighed it in her hands. Her shoulders settled. Her fingers found the grip without searching. The man with the phone stopped smiling. The silver-haired partner leaned forward. Richard's face changed by a fraction. She placed the ball. The laughter had thinned now, replaced by the restless silence that comes before a storm or a verdict. Annie stepped behind the ball and looked down the fairway. Annie took her stance. "Look at that, Richard," the silver-haired partner said, swirling the bourbon in his glass as if the whole scene had been arranged for his amusement. "The ball girl is actually taking this seriously. She probably doesn't even know which end of the club to hold. And now she's studying the 18th like she's on Sunday at Augusta." Richard laughed, loud enough for a pair of older members near the cart path to turn their heads. Annie had taken only 3 steps toward the teeing ground when he moved in front of her, blocking her path. "You know," he said, lifting his chin toward the driver in his hand, "this club costs more than half a year of whatever they pay you to pick up after men like me, so be careful. I'd hate for those dirty little hands to ruin something you couldn't replace in 10 lifetimes. Annie stopped about 2 steps away from him. She did not step back. Her face stayed calm, almost still. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "if you've made the challenge, please move aside and let me take the shot." The heavyset partner burst out laughing and slapped Richard on the shoulder hard enough to make the ice in his drink jump. "Did you hear that? She told you to move aside. That's the problem these days. People don't know respect anymore. Give them 1 minute on a private course, and they start acting like royalty." The club dropped to the grass at Annie's feet. A few of the men laughed before it even stopped rolling. "Pick it up," Richard said. "I'm feeling generous today. I'll let someone like you touch a luxury item once in your life. Consider it a favor from Richard Whitmore himself. Pick it up, swing properly, and try not to break my $1,000 driver." "That is charity," the heavyset man said, grinning. "She's probably never even seen $10,000 in one place." $10,000, Annie repeated softly. There was no hunger in her voice, no excitement. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "do you really believe everything in this world can be measured by paper?" Richard's face tightened. "Don't start preaching to me," he snapped. $10,000 is more than enough for a lesson about where you stand in society. Look at yourself, your clothes, your attitude. Wandering around Palm Crest like this is some public park on the wrong side of town." He stepped closer. Annie could smell expensive cologne, cigar smoke, and the sharp trace of liquor beneath his words. "This is Palm Crest," he said. "This place was built for people with education, money, and standing, people who understand tradition. Someone like you should be grateful to carry a basket here, not stand around talking back to members." "Exactly," the heavyset man said, nodding as if Richard had delivered a sermon. "It's ridiculous. A ball girl arguing with a billionaire." Annie's face remained composed, but something in her eyes had changed. Not anger, not fear, recognition. "My skin and my clothes don't define my value, sir," she said. "But the way you use money to humiliate people says a great deal about yours. My parents taught me that a real gentleman doesn't need to bully an 18-year-old girl to feel tall." If you feel for Annie in this moment, please like this video. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from, because someone near you might be watching this story too. Richard's face flushed. The veins in his neck stood out. "You think you can lecture me?" he said. He spun toward the cart path and shouted, "Harris, where did this trash come from? Why is she wandering around the 18th hole? Get her off this course right now." Mr. Harris moved forward, pale beneath his visor. His hands were held slightly out, not quite pleading, not quite surrendering. "Mr. Whitmore," he said carefully, "I don't think we need to make this worse. She is—" Richard cut him off with a hard wave of his hand. "What are you afraid of? I'm a VIP guest here. I pay more in annual fees than most people make in 5 years. I have every right to ask that eyesores be removed from my game." He leaned closer to Harris, lowering his voice just enough to make it more threatening. "Are you defending her against me? Or would you like to explain to the board why you can't control your own course?" Harris swallowed. His eyes flicked to Annie, then back to Richard. "That is not what I meant," he said. "But, Mr. Whitmore, you truly do not know who she—" Uncle Harris, Annie said gently. The manager stopped. She did not look away from Richard. Let him talk. I want to hear how far Mr. Whitmore is willing to go. Harris stood there for a moment, caught between duty and dread. Then he stepped back, his jaw tight, his expression almost sorrowful. Richard mistook the silence for victory. There, he said, turning back to Annie. At least someone here still understands authority. He pointed toward the 18th hole, where the flag snapped hard against the wind. You want to prove me wrong? Fine. Here's the challenge again. From here, put that ball in the hole. Do it. And the $10,000 is yours. I'll even apologize for underestimating you. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. But if you miss, or if you don't have the nerve to swing, you walk out of Palm Crest and never come back. This course has no room for people who confuse charity with equality. The heavyset partner let out a low whistle. The silver-haired man gave a laugh that sounded thinner than before. Annie looked at each of them, one by one, then back at Richard. I want everyone here to witness what Mr. Whitmore just promised, she said. A billionaire's word should mean something. Richard sneered. It does. Good, Annie said. Then I hope you don't regret giving it. She bent and picked up the driver. The laughter began again, but it did not last. Her feet found the turf with quiet certainty. She did not fumble with the club, did not test it like a stranger, did not ask where to stand. She weighed it once in her hands, glanced toward the wind, then toward the distant flag. The silver-haired partner stopped swirling his drink. Richard's smile held, but only because pride kept it there. Annie placed the ball, stepped behind it, and looked down the fairway. The 18th stretched before her in the hard afternoon light, long, narrow, and waiting. Behind her, Mr. Harris held his breath. Richard crossed his arms, and Annie prepared to swing. Annie did not swing right away. She let the silence settle first, because silence had weight, and right then, everyone on that fairway was carrying some part of it. The driver felt slightly heavier than what she was used to. Richard had chosen it for show, not balance. The shaft was expensive, the finish flawless, the grip too new, the kind of club a man bought to be seen carrying it. Annie rolled her fingers once around the handle and felt what mattered. Weight, length, flex. The club would do what it was told if the person holding it knew how to speak its language. Behind her, Richard gave a dry laugh. Taking your time, aren't you? He said. Don't worry, sweetheart. The hole won't get any closer. The heavyset partner chuckled again, though his laughter had lost some of its body. He had expected Annie to hold the driver awkwardly. Maybe put her hands in the wrong place. Maybe ask where to stand. Instead, she was studying the fairway with the quiet focus of someone who had stopped hearing them. Annie shifted her feet. The grass beneath her was tight and fast, cut so clean it seemed painted onto the earth. The wind came hard from the right, then pushed back toward her face, changing just enough to make the shot cruel. The flag at 18 leaned, snapped straight, then leaned again. Most players would aim safe. But safe would not reach the hole. Safe would leave the ball short, buried in the slope, or caught by the bunker guarding the front left. She had one ball, one swing, one promise from a man who never expected to honor it. Mr. Harris stood near the cart path, his hands clasped in front of him. He wanted to stop this, but the moment had moved beyond management. He could see it now. There were times when a person had to be protected, and there were times when a person had chosen to stand. Annie had chosen. All he could do was watch and hope Richard Whitmore understood what he had invited before it was too late. Annie looked once toward the clubhouse. The white columns rose in the distance, bright under the sun. Somewhere inside, her father was in a meeting with board members who still believed they were negotiating the future of Palm Crest. They were talking about transition plans, youth access, staff wages, legal language, endowment funds, the sort of words adults used when they wanted change to sound orderly. Annie respected that work, but out here, change had become less orderly. It had a face, a voice, a man in pressed khakis telling her she did not belong. Her mother would have hated the way Richard spoke, not because Evelyn Reed was easily offended, but because she believed language could either lift the world or poison it. Annie could almost hear her now, standing in the kitchen back home, turning from the stove with a wooden spoon in her hand. Don't let ugly make you ugly, baby. That's how it wins. Annie breathed in through her nose, slow and steady. Richard saw her pause and mistook it for doubt. Changed your mind? He called. No shame in admitting you're out of your depth. Well, Maybe a little shame. The silver-haired partner smiled, but his eyes stayed on Annie's hands. He had played enough golf to know what he was seeing, even if he did not want to say it out loud. Her left wrist was firm. Her grip was clean. Her shoulders were relaxed in a way amateurs never managed when people were watching. "Richard," he murmured. "Maybe we should just let this go." Richard turned his head sharply. "What?" I said. "Maybe we've had our fun." Richard's face hardened. "No." She wanted to prove something. Let her. Annie heard that. She heard the small crack in the confidence behind it. That was the thing about men like Richard. They could laugh at you all day if they thought the ending belonged to them. The moment the ending became uncertain, the laughter started looking for a door. She stepped to the ball. The fairway stretched long and narrow, framed by palms and low white sand. Beyond it, the green waited like a secret. She did not think about the $10,000. She did not think about the men. She thought about Samuel's hand trembling in the grass. She thought about the way he had whispered balls while lying half-conscious, afraid his work would be left unfinished. She thought about every person who had ever bent their back to keep a beautiful place beautiful, while other people walked past them without learning their names. Then she thought about her father. Jonathan Reed had taught her golf before he taught her how rare it was for people like them to be welcomed into certain rooms. When Annie was 7, he put a cut-down iron in her hands and told her the ball did not care what anyone called her. At 12, after a parent at a junior tournament asked if she was there to carry someone's bag, he sat with her on the tailgate of their SUV and said, "You don't swing to answer fools. You swing because the game deserves your best." At 16, when she lost a championship by one stroke and cried into a towel where nobody could see, he told her, "A good golfer learns the wind. A strong person learns insult. Neither one gets to choose your direction." Now the wind pressed against her face, and insult stood behind her with crossed arms. Annie set the club behind the ball. The man with the phone raised it again, but he was no longer smiling. He wanted proof now, not comedy. Richard glanced at his partners. "Watch this," he said, but his voice had gone dry. Annie drew the club back halfway, then stopped. Richard laughed too quickly. "What's wrong?" Annie stepped away from the ball and looked at him. "For clarity," she said, "this is still your challenge." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Of course it is. And if the ball goes in, you will pay $10,000? "Yes," he snapped, "if it goes in." And everyone here heard that? She turned slightly, not pleading, not performing, just letting the question rest among the men who had laughed a few minutes earlier. The heavy-set partner lifted his glass. "We heard it." The silver-haired man gave a small nod. "Yes," Mr. Harris said quietly. "I heard it." Annie looked back at Richard. "Thank you." That simple thank you irritated him more than any insult could have. It sounded too much like control. "Hit the ball," he said. Annie returned to her stance. This time she did not stop. The driver rose in a smooth arc. Not rushed. Not forced. Her shoulders turned, hips following with clean restraint. The motion compact, but loaded with power. For half a second, everything held together in perfect stillness. Annie's eyes on the ball, the wind across the grass. Richard's smile frozen on his face. Harris watching like a man afraid to breathe. Then Annie swung. The sound was not loud, but it was pure. A sharp crack cut through the fairway as the club met the ball dead center. The ball launched low at first, boring into the wind instead of rising helplessly into it. Then it climbed, catching its line, turning against the sky with a controlled draw that made the silver-haired partner whisper something under his breath. Richard's arms fell from his chest. The heavy-set man lowered his drink. The ball kept going. It carried the first stretch of fairway, cleared the narrow bend, and rode the wind as if Annie had not fought it but persuaded it. For a moment, even the course seemed to watch. The carts stopped on the path. A groundskeeper near the bunker straightened. Two women on the terrace turned toward the sound and shaded their eyes. Annie did not move from her finish. Her body held the pose, balanced, quiet, certain. The ball dropped onto the far edge of the fairway, kicked forward, and kept running. Richard swallowed. "No," he muttered it. But the ball was not finished. It rolled toward the green, slowing just enough as it reached the slope. The flag snapped hard once, then settled. The ball turned left, then softened right, following a line so delicate it seemed less like luck than memory. Nobody laughed now. The ball reached the green. It kept rolling. The cup waited. and every man who had mistaken Annie Reed for someone beneath him leaned forward as if the world itself had narrowed to that small white ball crossing the grass. The ball slowed at the lip of the cup. For one long second, it seemed to rest there, half in shadow, half in sunlight, as if even the ball understood the weight of what it was about to do. Richard's mouth opened. The heavy-set partner stopped breathing through his laugh. "Mr." Harris pressed one hand against his chest. Then the ball dropped. A small, clean sound rose from the 18th green. Click. That was all. No thunder. No music. No speech from heaven. Just a white ball falling into a cup on a private golf course in Palm Beach. But the sound cut through every insult Richard Whitmore had thrown, every laugh his partners had offered, every silent compromise made by men who knew better and chose comfort anyway. For a moment, nobody moved. Annie lowered the driver. The wind came across the fairway again, lifting the edge of her shirt, brushing against the grass, carrying the silence farther than any applause could have gone. She did not smile. She did not raise her hands. She did not turn to the men and ask if they had seen it. She only stood there, balanced and calm, as if the shot had done exactly what she had asked of it. The silver-haired partner was the first to speak, though his voice had almost disappeared. "My God," he said. That went in. The heavy-set man blinked at the distant green, then at Annie, then at the empty teeing ground in front of her. His drink hung forgotten in one hand. A drop of condensation slid down the glass and fell onto his shoe. "That's impossible," he muttered. "No," Mr. Harris said quietly, though no one had asked him. "It's not." Richard turned toward him. The manager did not lower his eyes this time. Richard looked back down the fairway. His face had gone pale beneath the tan, but his anger arrived quickly, rushing in to cover the shock. Men like him did not know what to do with being wrong. They only knew how to become louder. "That was a lucky bounce," he said. No one answered. He forced a laugh, short and brittle. "Come on. We all saw it. The ball caught the slope. That's not skill. That's a fluke." The silver-haired partner stared at him. "Richard," she carried the wind. She landed it exactly where it needed to land. Richard's head snapped toward him. "Don't start. I'm just saying." "I said don't start." The words came out sharp enough to end the exchange. The silver-haired man looked away, but not before Annie saw something pass across his face. Shame. Maybe. Or the realization that he had spent years laughing at men like Richard because it was easier than standing apart from them. Annie walked toward Richard and held the driver out to him. "Grip first." "Your club," she said. He did not take it. Up close, she could see the sweat at his temple, the small twitch near his jaw. He looked less like a king now, and more like a man trying to hold a mask against a strong wind. "You really think you've done something," he said. "I made the shot. You got lucky. I made the shot you challenged me to make." The heavy-set partner cleared his throat. "Well, technically, Richard, she did." Richard turned on him. "Are you her lawyer now?" The man lifted both hands and stepped back. "I'm just saying there were witnesses." "Witnesses to a joke," Richard snapped. He looked around at the small group that had gathered. 2 older members by the cart path, a groundskeeper near the bunker, a young caddy standing with his mouth slightly open. Miss Harris still rigid beside the path. "It was a joke. Nobody with a brain would think I was seriously handing $10,000 to some girl who picked up a club one time and got lucky." Annie's eyes stayed on him. "A joke usually ends with everyone laughing," she said. Richard leaned closer. "Careful." "Why?" "Because you're still standing on private property. And you're still standing in front of witnesses." That landed harder than she expected. Richard's eyes flicked toward his partners, then to Mr. Harris, then toward the clubhouse. His mind was no longer on the money. It was on control. Who had it? Who had lost it? Who had seen? He reached for the driver at last, but instead of taking it gently, he snatched it from her hand. "You people love making everything dramatic," he said. "I gave you a little attention, and now you think you're owed something." Annie heard the shift. "You people." There it was, no longer dressed in jokes or country club language. The truth had slipped out of his mouth because pressure had squeezed it loose. Mr. Harris stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore, that is enough." Richard turned slowly. "Excuse me?" "I said that is enough." The manager's voice shook, but only a little. He was an older man, and the fear in him was not cowardice. It was the fear of someone who had worked too many years in rooms where rich anger could cost ordinary people their jobs. Still, He stood there. Richard smiled without warmth. You want to choose sides, Harris? I am choosing the rules of this club. I am this club. Men like me keep places like this alive. No, Harris said, glancing toward Samuel's empty basket on the grass. Men like Samuel do. The sentence quieted the fairway again. Richard's face flushed dark red. For a moment, Annie thought he might actually strike the old manager with the club in his hand. Instead, he pointed it toward Harris like an accusation. You forget who you're talking to. No, sir, Harris said. For the first time today, I believe I remember exactly who I'm talking to. The silver-haired partner exhaled. The heavy-set man looked down into his glass again, suddenly fascinated by the melting ice. Richard laughed, but there was no strength behind it now. Fine. You all want to turn this into some moral performance? Here it is. She hit a lucky shot. Congratulations. He gave Annie a slow, mocking clap. There? Happy? You promised $10,000, Annie said. And I said it was a joke. You said if I sank the ball, the money was mine. Richard lowered his voice. And who are you going to tell? Your supervisor? The help desk? Some little social media crowd that gets bored by dinner? Annie studied him for a moment. She was not surprised anymore. That made her sadder than anger would have. My father once told me, she said, a promise only reveals its value when keeping it costs you something. I don't care what your father told you. You might. Richard stared at her. Before he could answer, a low hum came from the cart path beyond the bend. Everyone turned. 3 golf carts were approaching from the direction of the clubhouse. They were not the small 2-seat carts used by members during casual rounds. These were larger, polished, driven by club staff in formal green jackets. In the front cart sat 2 board members Annie recognized from that morning. In the second sat a woman from the legal team, holding a folder tight against her lap. And in the last cart, sitting upright with one hand resting on his knee, was Jonathan Reed. Mr. Harris saw him and closed his eyes for the briefest second. Richard saw him too. The change in Richard was immediate. His shoulders pulled back, his chin lifted. He smoothed the front of his polo with one hand and tried to rearrange his face into the expression of a man who had not spent the last 20 minutes humiliating a young woman in public. Well, he said under his breath, almost to himself. Finally, the cart stopped near the teeing ground. Jonathan Reed stepped down slowly. He was tall, with gray at his temples and the kind of presence that did not need to announce itself. Men in Richard's world had been trying to get 5 private minutes with him for months. Richard had sent emails, made calls, donated to the right committees, appeared at the right dinners. He wanted Jonathan's approval because Jonathan Reed's approval opened doors that money alone could not. Richard moved first, his smile returning too quickly. Mr. Reed, he said, extending his hand. What an honor. I was hoping we'd have a chance to. Jonathan walked past him. He went straight to Annie. His eyes moved once over her face, checking not for injury, but for the kind of wound that does not show on skin. Annie, he said, voice low, are you all right? The fairway seemed to tilt under Richard's feet. Annie nodded. I'm all right, Dad. The word struck harder than the shot. Dad. The heavy-set partner's glass slipped from his hand and landed in the grass without breaking. The silver-haired man stared at Annie, as if seeing her for the first time. Mr. Harris bowed his head, not in fear now, but in relief. Richard stood frozen, his outstretched hand still hanging in the air. Jonathan placed a hand gently on Annie's shoulder, then turned to face the men gathered around them. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice even, this is my daughter, Annie Reed. No one spoke. Jonathan's gaze moved from Richard to the distant 18th green, then back again. And from what I just heard on the radio, he continued, she has done exactly what Mr. Whitmore challenged her to do. Richard did not move for several seconds. His hand remained half raised where Jonathan had walked past it, fingers slightly curled, as if his body had not yet received the news that the handshake was no longer coming. Your daughter, he said at last. Jonathan looked at him. Yes. The word was simple, but it changed the temperature of the fairway. The men who had laughed with Richard now stood like schoolboys caught near a broken window. The heavy-set partner bent awkwardly to retrieve his glass from the grass. The silver-haired man stared toward the 18th green, where the flag still moved in the wind above the cup that had swallowed Annie's ball. Richard forced a laugh, but it came out thin. Well then, he said, smoothing his shirt again. This is clearly an unfortunate misunderstanding. Annie looked at him. Was it? Richard's smile faltered. Jonathan did not speak for her. He kept his hand on her shoulder for one more second, then let it fall. It was a small gesture, but everyone saw it. Annie was his daughter, yes, but she was not a child hiding behind him. She stood on her own feet. Richard shifted his weight. Miss Reed, had I known who you were. That's the problem, Annie said. His mouth closed. You didn't know who I was, she continued, her voice steady. So you decided I was someone you could insult. The board members in the cart exchanged a look. Mr. Harris lowered his eyes. Not out of fear now, but because the truth had been placed in the open and there was no polite way to pretend it was not there. Richard glanced at the others, measuring the damage. Now, let's not twist this. I saw a young woman picking up balls where members were playing. I had concerns. Any reasonable person would. You didn't ask my name, Annie said. You didn't ask why I was helping. You didn't ask if Mr. Samuel was all right. You looked at me and decided what I was worth. The heavyset partner opened his mouth, perhaps to help Richard, then thought better of it. Jonathan turned slightly toward Mr. Harris. Where is Samuel? In the staff room, sir, Harris said. He's awake. Dehydrated, but stable. I had medical staff check him. We're arranging for him to be taken home. Annie's face softened for the first time. Good. Richard saw the softness and tried to use it. See? That's what matters. The man is fine. The girl is fine. The shot was impressive. No harm done. Jonathan's eyes settled on him. No harm? Richard swallowed, but recovered. Men like him did not survive in business without learning how to dress retreat as reason. I mean no permanent harm, he said. Everyone got carried away. Golf course banter. You know how it is. I know exactly how it is, Jonathan said. Something in his tone made Richard stop smiling. Jonathan looked around the group. His voice stayed calm, but it carried across the teeing ground without effort. A young woman helped an employee who collapsed in the heat. She picked up the work he was afraid to leave unfinished. Then she was mistaken for staff and insulted for it. When she corrected that mistake, the insults got worse. When she was challenged in public, she accepted. When she succeeded, the man who challenged her called his own promise a joke. Nobody interrupted him. The legal woman in the second cart wrote something in a folder. Richard noticed and stiffened. Is this really necessary? Jonathan turned back to him. You made it necessary. Richard gave a short laugh and lowered his voice, though not enough to keep others from hearing. Mr. Reed, surely two men in our positions can discuss this privately. Annie's eyes moved to her father. Jonathan shook his head once. You did not speak to my daughter privately. Richard's jaw tightened. You did not humiliate her privately, Jonathan continued. You did not make your challenge privately. So no, Mr. Whitmore, I don't believe privacy is where this belongs. The silver-haired partner shifted, then said quietly, Richard, you should just pay it. Richard turned on him. Stay out of this. I was in it when I laughed, the man said. That was the first honest thing anyone in Richard's group had said all afternoon. It surprised even him. He looked down at the grass after saying it, as if ashamed it had taken so long. Annie watched him for a moment. She did not thank him. Some truths did not deserve applause just because they arrived late. Richard's anger was no longer hidden. This is absurd. You all want to act like I committed a crime because I made a joke on a golf course. A joke doesn't tell someone they don't belong because of how they look, Annie said. I never said that. You said enough. You're putting words in my mouth. No, Mr. Harris said. Richard spun toward him. Harris's voice was quiet but clear. No, sir, she is not. The fairway held still again. Harris looked older in that moment, but not weaker. I heard what you said. So did your guests. So did the caddy. So did the groundskeeper by the bunker. You told her people like her should be grateful to carry a basket here. You told her this place was for people with education, money, and standing. You told her she did not belong. Richard stared at him with open disbelief. You work for this club. Yes, Harris said, and today, for once, I'm going to act like that means protecting its standards. Jonathan nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Richard saw it, and that seemed to frighten him more than Harris's words. He turned back to Jonathan, speaking faster now. Mr. Reed, I have been pursuing membership here in good faith. I've supported the club. I've attended every fundraiser. I was prepared to make a significant contribution to the youth development wing. The one my foundation is restructuring? Jonathan asked. Richard hesitated. Yes, exactly, that one. Annie looked at him. You were going to donate to youth access while telling me people like me didn't belong on the course? Richard flushed again. I did not know you were a champion golfer. You shouldn't have needed to. Jonathan looked at his daughter then, and something like pride passed through his face, restrained but deep. Annie had not raised her voice once. She had not called Richard names. She had simply kept handing him the truth, until he could no longer pretend it was anything else. The heavy-set partner cleared his throat. For what it's worth, Richard. The girl made the shot. We all heard the terms. Richard glared at him. You too? The man lifted both hands. I'm not losing my reputation over your temper. There it was. Not courage, exactly. Self-preservation. But sometimes even self-preservation helped move a lie out of the way. Jonathan turned to Richard. Richard's lips parted. Annie raised one hand slightly. I don't need him on his knees. Richard's eyes flashed, as if even mercy offended him. I don't, Annie said. An apology forced from the mouth isn't worth much. But the promise is public. The money should be paid. To you? Richard asked, the bitterness returning. No. That caught him. Annie looked toward the cart path, in the direction of the staff room, to Samuel, and to the caddies, groundskeepers, and ball attendants who work in this heat while men like you forget they have names. The silence after that was different. It did not accuse. It asked everyone present what they had overlooked. Jonathan's expression softened, but he said nothing. This was Annie's decision. Mr. Harris blinked quickly and looked away. Richard gave a hard, humorless laugh. So now I'm funding the staff? You're keeping your word, Annie said. What happens to the money after that is not your concern. The legal woman stepped down from the cart and opened her folder. Mr. Whitmore, a personal check will be sufficient, or we can process a transfer through the club office with witnesses present. Richard stared at her. Who are you? Elaine Porter, counsel for Reed Foundation. His face changed again. The name landed where pride could not block it. Reed Foundation. Not a rumor anymore. Not a future possibility. Present tense. He looked from Elaine to Jonathan, then to the board members, then to Harris. The ground beneath his ambition had begun to move. This is ridiculous, he said, but the force had left the words. Jonathan spoke gently, which somehow made it worse. No, Mr. Whitmore. This is accountability. Richard stood there with the driver still in his hand, the same driver he had dropped at Annie's feet minutes earlier. Now it looked less like a symbol of status and more like evidence. The silver-haired partner reached into his jacket and removed a pen. He held it out without looking at Richard. For a moment, Richard did not take it. Then he did. Elaine produced a blank check from Richard's assistant, who had arrived in the second cart looking as if he wished he had chosen another profession. Richard snatched it, bent over the small writing surface of the cart, and began to fill it out with hard, angry strokes. $10,000. Payable as directed to the Palmcrest Employee Relief Fund, with Samuel Turner named first among the recipients. When Richard finished, he tore the check free and held it out toward Annie, as if daring her to take pleasure in it. She did not reach for it. Give it to Mr. Harris, she said. Richard's hand tightened around the paper. Then, with visible effort, he turned and handed it to the manager. Harris accepted it with both hands, as if it were not a check but a long overdue correction. Annie looked once at Richard. Thank you for keeping your word. He flinched, not because the words were cruel, but because they were not. Then the breeze shifted across the 18th hole, carrying with it the smell of cut grass, hot pavement, and something changing beneath the polished surface of Palmcrest. Richard had paid the money, but everyone on that fairway could feel that the $10,000 was not the end of what he had lost. Richard's hand remained empty after he gave the check to Harris. It was a small thing, a piece of paper gone from his fingers. But the loss seemed to confuse him. Men like Richard were used to money leaving their hands and returning as obedience, applause, access, silence. This check had bought none of those things. It had only confirmed what everyone had witnessed. Harris folded the check once and placed it carefully inside his jacket pocket. His hands were steady now. A few minutes earlier, he had looked like a man balancing his job against his conscience. Now he looked like someone who had finally set one of those things down. Mr. Harris, Annie said, please make sure Samuel knows it came from the promise, not charity. Harris nodded. I will. Richard gave a low laugh. Of course. Dress it up however you want. Make me the villain and the staff the heroes. That's what this is now, isn't it? Jonathan turned toward him. No one had to make you anything. Mr. Whitmore. Richard's face tightened. I've donated more money to this club than most members have ever earned. I've sponsored events here. I've hosted investors here. I've brought attention to Palm Crest. You brought attention today, Annie said. He looked at her sharply. She did not look away. There was no triumph in her expression, only a calm that unsettled him more than anger would have. Richard knew how to fight anger. He could belittle it, call it emotional, accuse it of being ungrateful, but calm gave him nothing to grab. The board members stepped down from their cart. One was a woman in her 70s named Margaret Bell, who had been part of Palm Crest longer than Richard had been wealthy. She carried herself with the kind of old Southern restraint that made every word feel measured before it was allowed out. The other, Thomas Keene, was a retired judge with silver eyebrows and a habit of listening longer than most people liked. Margaret looked first at Annie, then at Jonathan. We heard there was an incident. Jonathan's eyes stayed on Richard. You heard correctly. Richard turned to Margaret as if she might still be useful. Margaret, this has been blown completely out of proportion. I made a remark. She made a remarkable shot. The matter is settled. Is it? Margaret asked. The question was gentle. That made it dangerous. Richard forced a smile. I paid the money. Thomas Keene glanced toward Harris. After denying the promise? Richard's smile disappeared. Judge, with all due respect, this was informal banter on a golf course. Thomas looked toward the 18th green. Banter tends not to include banishment. The silver-haired partner looked down. The heavy-set one rubbed the back of his neck and said nothing. Annie watched the adults speak around the wound Richard had made. That was how places like Palm Crest had survived for so long. They knew how to soften sharp things with proper language. Incident, misunderstanding, banter, poor choice of words. She had heard those phrases in tournaments, in school meetings, in charity dinners where people praised opportunity while locking the door from the inside. Her mother had once told her, "Be careful when people rename cruelty. They do it so they won't have to repent for it." Annie thought of Samuel again. She pictured his hands, rough at the knuckles, still reaching toward spilled golf balls while his body was trying to shut down. She wondered how many years he had been invisible on this course. She wondered how many men had called him by the wrong name and still expected him to smile. Jonathan seemed to know where her thoughts had gone. He looked at Harris. Take us to Samuel, when we're done here. Yes, sir. Richard let out an impatient breath. Are we really turning a round of golf into a labor hearing now? Margaret's eyes cooled. A man collapsed from heat on our grounds today, Richard, and I'm sure the staff is handling it. The staff, Annie said, is the reason this place looks perfect while people like you complain about where the ball lands. For the first time, Margaret's mouth moved as if she nearly smiled. She did not, but the corner softened. Richard pointed at Annie, then stopped himself when he realized how it looked. He lowered his hand. You are very comfortable speaking to people above your station. Jonathan's voice cut in before Annie could answer. There it is again. Richard blinked. What? Your favorite word without saying it. Station, place, belonging. You keep circling the same idea, Mr. Whitmore, that certain people are born to stand on the tee box, and others are born to keep the grass clean around it. Richard's eyes flashed. Don't lecture me about birth. I built everything I have, and then decided no one else deserved room to rise, Jonathan said. That sentence landed hard. Even Richard's partners looked at him differently. They knew the story he liked to tell at dinners. How he had built himself from nothing, how no one gave him anything, how he respected grit above pedigree. Yet on the fairway, faced with a young black woman he mistook for staff, he had become the locked door he once claimed to hate. Richard's voice dropped. You don't know me. I know what you did when you thought my daughter had no power. Annie looked at her father then. His face was composed, but she could see the anger beneath it. Jonathan Reed was not a man who raised his voice often. He did not need to. He had spent his life moving through rooms where men tested his patience and called it conversation. He had learned to carry fury without spilling it. Annie had inherited that from him, though her mother always said Annie carried it with more grace than either of them deserved. Elaine Porter stepped closer with the folder in her arms. Mr. Reed, the transition documents are ready for signature inside. The board has already approved the final transfer pending the public announcement. Richard stared at her. Transfer? No one answered at once. The silence widened. Richard looked from Elaine to Margaret, then to Thomas Keene. What transfer? Margaret straightened. Palmcrest has entered into a controlling partnership with the Reed Foundation. Richard's face emptied. That's not possible. Thomas said. It is already approved. Richard gave a hard laugh. No. I would have heard about this. You were not on the board, Margaret said. I was applying for VIP membership. Yes, she said. You were. The past tense did not pass unnoticed. Richard turned to Jonathan. And for the first time that afternoon, there was something close to fear in his eyes. Not fear for his safety. Fear of exclusion. Fear of the door closing from the inside while he stood on the wrong side of it. Jonathan spoke evenly. As of tomorrow morning, the Reed Foundation will oversee Palmcrest's operations, community access initiatives, youth development programs, and membership standards. Annie felt every eye shift toward her, some with surprise, some with embarrassment. Harris already knew, but even he looked moved hearing it said aloud on the grass where Samuel had nearly fainted and Richard had thrown a club at her feet. Richard swallowed. You're turning this place into some public charity course? No, Jonathan said. We're turning it into what it should have been all along, a course with standards that include character. Richard's laugh came out broken. Character doesn't pay for fairways. No, Annie said. But people do. The ones you don't see. Harris looked toward the staff path. A groundskeeper stood near the bunker with his rake in hand, pretending not to listen and failing. A young caddy had edged closer, still holding a towel. On the terrace, two older women had gone quiet over their iced tea. The whole club seemed to be listening now, from the polished porch to the sand traps, Richard noticed. His humiliation was no longer contained to a small circle of partners. It had spread across the place he wanted to conquer. He stepped toward Jonathan. You can't deny my membership over a misunderstanding. Jonathan looked at Annie. I won't decide that alone. Richard frowned. What does that mean? Annie turned to him. It means tomorrow, this club begins a new youth access program. I'll be helping oversee it. You? Richard said before he could stop himself. Yes. His eyes moved over her again. But now the same details betrayed him differently. The plain clothes, the old shoes, the calm face. None of them meant what he had decided they meant. None of them ever had, Annie continued. And the first standard of that program is simple. No child who walks through these gates will be treated like they have to prove they're human before they're allowed to play. Margaret looked down at the grass. Thomas Keene nodded once. Richard said nothing. Annie stepped closer, just enough that he had to meet her eyes. You told me not to come back to places like this, she said. That may be difficult, Mr. Whitmore. Because as of tomorrow, this place will be part of my work. The words did not need to be loud. They moved through the fairway with more force than Richard's shouting had. Harris drew a slow breath. Elaine closed her folder. Richard's partners stood silent, each man calculating how far away from him he needed to be by dinner. Richard's face had gone pale again. You're enjoying this. Annie shook her head. No. I wish you had chosen better. That seemed to strike him harder than if she had insulted him. For one brief second, something human flickered behind his anger. Something wounded and old. But pride rushed in and smothered it. Jonathan turned to Harris. Please inform security that Mr. Whitmore's guest privileges are suspended pending formal review. Richard's head snapped toward him. You can't be serious. I am. My membership application, Margaret answered this time, will not proceed. The heavyset partner muttered something under his breath and stepped farther back. The silver-haired man removed his cap, though nobody had asked him to. Perhaps he did it out of discomfort. Perhaps respect. Perhaps because the sun suddenly felt harsher than it had before. Richard looked around for one friendly face and found none. The 18th hole stood behind Annie in the distance, quiet after doing its part. The check rested in Harris's jacket. Samuel waited in the staff room. The club Richard had tried to use as a mirror for his importance had just shown him something else. He turned away first. No apology came. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the silence that followed him as he walked toward his cart was not the silence of defeat alone. It was the silence of witnesses remembering. And sometimes, in places built to forget, remembering was the beginning of justice. Richard's cart rolled away from the 18th tee with less speed than anger required. He sat stiffly in the passenger seat while his assistant drove, his jaw locked, his eyes fixed ahead as though the fairway itself had betrayed him. Nobody called after him. Nobody tried to soften the moment. For a man who had spent his life making entrances and exits that people noticed, the quiet was a worse punishment than applause. Annie watched until the cart curved past the palms and disappeared toward the clubhouse road. She did not feel victory. Not the kind people imagined. Anyway, there was no thrill in watching a man lose face after he had tried to take yours. There was only the heavy relief of a storm moving a few miles down the coast, still visible, still dangerous, but no longer directly overhead. Jonathan stood beside her, hands loose at his sides. He did not ask if she was all right again. He knew she had answered once, and he knew his daughter well enough not to crowd her with concern in front of people who had already stared too long. Margaret Bell broke the silence first. "Miss Reed," she said, using the formal tone older Southern women used when respect mattered. "That was one of the finest shots I have seen on this course." Annie turned to her. "Thank you, ma'am." Thomas Keene gave a small nod. And one of the finest refusals to be diminished. Annie did not know what to say to that. So she said the truest thing. "I wish it hadn't been necessary." "So do I," Thomas said. The silver-haired partner approached slowly, his cap in one hand. Without Richard beside him, he looked smaller, not physically, but morally exposed. He stopped a few feet from Annie and cleared his throat. "My name is Charles Bennett," he said. "I owe you an apology." Annie waited. Charles glanced down at the grass, then back at her. "I laughed. At the beginning. I told myself it was harmless because I wasn't the one saying the worst of it. But I laughed." The heavyset partner remained near the carts, pretending to check his phone, though everyone knew he was listening. Annie looked at Charles for a long moment. Why? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He had expected dismissal, perhaps a gracious acceptance. Something that would let him leave quickly, with the wound covered. Why did I laugh? Yes. He pressed his lips together. Because Richard is useful. Because I've done business with him. Because it was easier to laugh than be the first man to stop. Annie nodded once. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was recognition. That's usually how it happens. Charles took that in. "I'm sorry." "Then remember it," Annie said. "Next time, be early." His face tightened, not in offense, but because the words had found their mark. "I will try." "No," Jonathan said quietly. "Trying is what people say when they want credit before the work." "Do it." Charles looked at him, then nodded. "Yes, sir." The heavyset man finally walked over, his cheeks still red. "Look, Miss Reed, things got out of hand. I didn't mean anything personal." Annie turned toward him. "You said I probably hadn't seen $10,000 in one place." He shifted. "It was a joke. No. It was a guess about my life. You made it because of what you thought I was." He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked toward Jonathan as if hoping for rescue from a father who would smooth the edges. Jonathan offered none. "I apologize," the man said at last. "For what I said." Annie held his gaze. "Apology accepted. Trust is not included." His eyes dropped. "Fair enough." Mr. Harris touched the check inside his jacket as if reminding himself it was still there. "Miss Annie, Mr. Reed, Samuel is in the staff room. I think he'd like to know what happened, though I'm not sure how much we should tell him all at once." "Tell him the truth," Annie said. But gently, Harris gave the smallest smile. "That I can do." They began walking toward the clubhouse, not as a procession, but people fell into place anyway. Jonathan and Annie walked side by side. Harris walked slightly ahead, guiding them along the cart path. Margaret and Thomas followed with Elaine Porter. Behind them, Charles and the heavyset man remained near the tee, left with their own silence. As they passed the practice range, Annie saw the place where Samuel had fallen. The grass had already been cleared. The scattered balls were gone. Someone had set the basket upright near the bench as if order could erase what had happened there. Annie slowed. Jonathan noticed. "You saw him fall?" "Yes." "How long before anyone else stopped?" Annie looked toward the clubhouse terrace. A few members were still watching, though they turned away when they realized she could see them. "Long enough." Jonathan's face hardened, but his voice stayed calm. "That changes today. It has to change more than today." "It will." She wanted to believe him. Not because she doubted her father, but because she knew institutions had a way of praising reform while protecting habit. The Reed Foundation could buy controlling interest. It could revise policy, fund programs, raise wages, open gates, but culture lived in smaller things. Whether a member learned a groundskeeper's name, whether a caddy could report mistreatment without fear, whether a young girl from the wrong zip code felt welcome before she won anything. Jonathan seemed to hear that thought without her saying it. Ownership opens the door, he said. It doesn't clean the house. Annie glanced at him. Mom said something like that once. Your mother said most true things before I had the good sense to repeat them. That made Annie smile despite the ache in her chest. The staff room sat behind the main building, past the polished dining room and the pro shop windows where shirts cost more than some families spent on groceries. The hallway narrowed as they moved away from the member areas. The floors changed from stone to plain tile. The air smelled of coffee, detergent, sunscreen, and cut grass carried in on work shoes. Samuel was sitting in a vinyl chair with an ice pack behind his neck and a paper cup of water in both hands. A young caddy stood near him, hovering like a grandson. When Samuel saw Annie, he tried to rise. No, sir, Annie said quickly. Please stay seated. Samuel eased back down, embarrassed. Miss, I heard some noise out there. Mr. Harris told me you took care of my basket. I only picked up a few balls. The caddy blurted. She hit an albatross on 18. Samuel blinked. She what? Harris shot the boy a look, but it was too late. Annie gave a small shrug. Mr. Whitmore made a challenge. Samuel's face changed when he heard the name. Fear passed through it first. Old and practiced. I hope I didn't cause trouble. That sentence hurt more than Richard's insults. Annie crouched in front of him so he would not have to look up. You didn't cause trouble, she said. You collapsed in the heat. That means the trouble was already here. Samuel looked at Jonathan then, recognizing him slowly. His eyes widened. Mr. Reed. Jonathan stepped forward and shook his hand with both of his. Samuel, I'm sorry it took a day like this for us to sit in this room. Samuel gave a tired laugh. Rooms like this don't usually get visitors from men like you. They will now, Jonathan said. Mr. Harris removed the check from his jacket. Mr. Whitmore made a public promise. Miss Annie asked that the money go to the staff relief fund, starting with you. Samuel stared at the check. His mouth trembled slightly. I don't need charity, Annie smiled softly. That's what I told Mr. Harris to make clear. It isn't charity. Its wages dignity should have paid a long time ago. The room went quiet. The caddy looked at the floor. Harris pressed his lips together. Even Elaine Porter, who had probably seen every kind of settlement paper, looked away for a moment. Samuel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, embarrassed by the tears. Your parents raised you right. Annie looked at Jonathan. They tried. Jonathan's voice thickened just enough for her to hear. Still trying. Samuel leaned back, the ice pack slipping slightly. That man Whitmore always spoke hard to folks. Most of us just learned to step aside. I know, Harris said quietly. Samuel looked at him, not accusing, just tired. Yes, sir. I think you do. Harris absorbed that. For a man his age, the sentence carried years. Times he had looked away. Times he had chosen keeping peace over making it right. He nodded slowly. I'm sorry, Sam. Samuel studied him, then gave a small nod. Then make it better for the young ones. Harris looked toward the caddy, then back at Samuel. I will. Annie stood. Through the small staff room window, she could see a strip of the course, green and perfect under the sun. From a distance, Palm Crest looked unchanged, but inside this plain room, with a tired old worker holding a cup of water and a check folded on the table, something had shifted. Justice had not arrived with trumpets. It had walked in through the back hallway, carrying the smell of grass and heat, asking people to say names they should have known already. Samuel kept both hands around the paper cup even after the water was gone. It was not thirst anymore. It was something to hold on to while the room shifted around him. For years, the staff room had been a place where workers lowered their voices and swallowed what they could not afford to say. Now Jonathan Reed stood beside the bulletin board with the faded emergency numbers, and Annie stood near the door with grass stains on her shoes. And Mr. Harris looked like a man finally hearing the echo of every complaint he had called minor. Elaine Porter set her folder on the small table. Mr. Reed, we should talk through immediate measures before the announcement. After what happened today, waiting would be unwise. Jonathan nodded. Then we don't wait. Harris straightened. Sir, I can call department heads in within the hour. Not department heads first, Annie said. The room turned to her. She glanced at Samuel, then at the young caddy, then at the row of lockers with names written on strips of tape. Ask the workers what they need before deciding what to give them. Otherwise, it's just another policy written by people who don't stand in the heat. Samuel looked down at his empty cup. She's right. Harris accepted that with a small nod. Yes, she is. The young caddy, whose name tag read Marcus, shifted near the counter. He was maybe 16, thin as a rail, with nervous eyes and a towel twisted in both hands. Can I say something? Jonathan turned to him. Please. Marcus swallowed. The water coolers on the back 9 run out almost every weekend. Nobody wants to radio it in because members complain if carts take too long. And some caddies skip lunch when the pace is backed up. Harris closed his eyes briefly. Marcus, it's true, Samuel said. Boys telling the truth. Annie leaned against the wall, listening. That was the part people often skipped. They loved speeches about dignity. But dignity started with hearing a hungry teenager say he skipped lunch so a wealthy man's round would not be delayed. Jonathan looked to Elaine. Write that down. Elaine already was. The door opened a few inches, and a woman in a laundry uniform peered inside. Her name was Darlene. Annie remembered from earlier. She had brought ice when Samuel collapsed. Sorry, Darlene said. Didn't mean to interrupt. You're not interrupting, Jonathan said. Darlene hesitated. Some of the kitchen staff heard Mr. Reed was here. They're asking if Samuel's okay. I'm all right, Samuel called, though his voice was still thin. Darlene looked relieved, then glanced at Annie, and they heard about the shot. Marcus could not help himself. Albatross. Darlene's eyebrows rose. Lord have mercy. For the first time since entering the room, Samuel laughed. It was weak, but real. The sound loosened something. Even Harris smiled for half a second. Jonathan said, Darlene, will you ask anyone off shift to join us? No pressure. We're making immediate changes. And I would rather hear from the people who live with the consequences. Darlene studied him, as if deciding whether a man in his position could mean a sentence like that. Yes, sir. I'll tell them. When she left, Annie looked through the small window again. Beyond the glass, Palmcrest moved as if nothing had happened. A cart crossed toward the 10th hole. A server in white carried a tray toward the terrace. Somewhere, someone laughed, too loudly over lunch. The surface stayed polished. That was the problem with polished places. They could reflect sunlight and hide rot at the same time. Her father came to stand beside her. You're quiet. I'm thinking. That usually means someone is about to have more work. She almost smiled. Good. He looked at her shoes. You never did change before walking the course. I wasn't planning to become part of the staff. No, he said. You were planning to avoid the reception. That too. Jonathan's expression softened. Your mother would say you found the more important room. Annie swallowed. She missed Evelyn most in moments like this. When doing the right thing did not feel clean or simple. When victory came with the taste of other people's pain. Her mother had been gone 3 years, but sometimes her absence entered a room before anyone else. Evelyn Reed would have known what to say to Samuel. She would have known how to comfort Harris without letting him off too easily. She would have looked at Richard Whitmore once and understood the wound beneath the cruelty without excusing a single word. She would have hated what he said, Annie murmured. Yes. She also would have told me not to hate him. Jonathan took a breath. Your mother was better at that than I am. Annie looked at him. Are you angry? Yes. At him? At him. At myself. At this club. At every room I've sat in where men used softer words to protect the same old habits. His voice stayed low. I came here today to sign papers. You found the truth those papers need to answer. Before Annie could respond, Darlene returned with 3 more employees, a kitchen worker named Luis, a groundskeeper named Ben, and a woman from housekeeping named Ruth, who looked to be in her late 50s and carried herself with the guarded dignity of someone used to being overlooked by design. They entered carefully. Not sure if they were allowed to sit. Jonathan noticed. Please, sit if you'd like. Nobody did at first. Samuel patted the chair beside him. Sit down, Ruth. If they fire us all, at least we'll be rested. The room laughed softly. Ruth sat. Jonathan folded his hands in front of him. I'll be direct. The Reed Foundation's transition begins tomorrow. What happened to Samuel today made clear that some changes can't wait. We need to hear what is broken. Luis looked at Harris. Harris gave him a nod. The heat schedule, Luis said. Kitchen gets hot. Outside gets worse. Staff are afraid to ask for breaks when events run behind. Ben added, equipment's old. Shade tents are stored but hardly used because members say they spoil the look of the course. Ruth's voice was quiet. Some members speak to staff like we're furniture. Not all, but enough. People report it. Then nothing happens because the member is important. Harris looked as if every sentence cost him. That has happened. Ruth turned to him. More than happened, Mr. Harris. It became expected. No one spoke for a moment. Then Harris nodded. You're right. That admission changed his face. It did not fix anything, but it removed one stone from the wall. Elaine looked up from her notes. Immediate action items. Heat safety protocol, mandatory water checks every hour, protected meal breaks. Member conduct reporting system, no retaliation, staff relief fund, equipment review, shade station.